if you want to be healthy and you think taking care of your body will do the trick, well, actually, it turns out it's not really enough. But this is not to discourage you. Stick around to understand how to really be healthy, and honestly, it might surprise you.
Millions of people a year globally die as a result of air pollution. But we never, as doctors, write that on a death certificate. We write that they died of heart disease or complications from dementia or complications from, maybe a lung disease, but we don't connect it to the air pollution. So people don't realize how dangerous it really is.
When we think about health, we think about what happens within the body, at least in Western and Westernized societies. And that's fair, because that's where we perceive ourselves as healthy or unhealthy. But it is a bit more complex than that. So to understand that complexity, I'm speaking with Dr. Wendy Johnson, author of a book called Kinship Medicine, who will share her perspective as a family physician and public health professor.
Let my breath brush your ears. Inhale these words. May they fill your lungs and the atmosphere.
In her book, Kinship Medicine, Dr. Johnson offers two strong images. So let's start with the first one, the machine. More than an image, it's a paradigm, a worldview even, where, thanks to science, we understand so much about how the human body works and thrives that we've started to see it as a machine that can be fixed or optimized from the inside. And it is an interesting lens, but Wendy explains that we're past the point where it's actually helpful and that it doesn't reflect the most recently acquired knowledge.
The machine metaphor has been super helpful, I think, for the advancement of science over the last couple hundred years. In the 1850s, our life expectancy for folks was somewhere around less than 50 years, really, the average life expectancy. And that's gone up to 75 or 80 years now. But the thing is that the life expectancies have been leveling off, especially in the United Kingdom and also in the United States. We've actually seen life expectancies even gone down or really stay stagnant for the last couple of decades. So maybe this metaphor is not helping us advance and get over this kind of hump, I think. And maybe we need to look at health in a different way. The machine metaphor really is helpful for things like surgery or, if you break your leg, certainly it's really helpful for those certain individualistic things. It's really been helpful in the development of a lot of things that have helped us get to this point, like vaccines and antibiotics. But now we're learning a lot more about the body, which seems to be a more integrated community. For example, your body is made up of about 30 trillion cells that are your cells, that have your DNA. But there's about 39 trillion cells in your body that belong to other organisms that have other DNA, and that's your microbiome. So you really are majority not you. You are made up of this community of living things that the relationships between all those microbes and your body are really important for many, many functions, a lot of digestive functions, the health of your skin, the way your lungs function. We think a lot about the gut microbiome, which is super important for digesting fiber, for even giving you access to metabolizing vitamins, things like that. But there's also microbiome in your lung, in your genitals, in your nose, on your skin. And all of those are super important for your overall health. So when we think about that, this metaphor of a community or an ecosystem seems to be more accurate. And the relationships that come outside of your body between you and those organisms, and also even organisms that are outside your body, because those organisms in your body are in constant communication with the outside world as well, become really, really important. And this has become a focus of a lot of new research into the microbiome, but also into things like the way your immune system works, because your immune system is in constant communication also with the outside world, the way autoimmune illnesses can happen, the way inflammation in your body can occur, and how that affects a lot of disease processes. So it might be time to think about another sort of metaphor that really focuses on those relationships with other organisms in the outside and inside world.
So the human body is not this individual isolated thing that can be fixed in isolation. And yet, even the types of Western medicine that seem to take this into account still adopt this very individualistic mindset. It's the case with things like biohacking or functional medicine, which Wendy refers to as being boutique medicine offering designer cures. I mean, there's really nothing wrong with going to a functional doctor or tracking your sleep to rest better or taking a supplement to improve your gut health. But it's important to notice that the focus of this type of medicine is really on the individual's ability and responsibility to optimize the self. And we'll talk more about why that's not a rational way of dealing with health. But for now, I want to show you what kind of culture that can foster by reading a passage from the book The Body is a Doorway by Sophie Strand, where she talks about her own evolving understanding of health as she lives with chronic illness. She has a pretty interesting take on this topic, which goes well beyond functional medicine and biohacking. She was going to be on the show but couldn't make it in the end, so you'll have to bear with my reading. I'm sorry. One of the cultural stories we live in but have trouble recognizing is a story about health and personal responsibility. It has very little to do with the happiness and vitality of our actual bodies. The story goes like this. Health belongs to an individual. Health is both a possession and an external reflection of someone's personal achievements or moral failings. Every individual is personally responsible for the ways in which their body changes, misbehaves, and deviates from the norm. It's not just scientific reports and the medical establishment. This story encompasses both traditional and New Age spirituality's obsession with sin and purity. If we are sick, we might have done something wrong in a past life. If we were raped or abused, we probably invited in this soul contract. If our cancer isn't going away, we are not drinking enough celery juice. If we can pay for the foods and medicines that might improve our autoimmune issues, it's because we haven't yet manifested enough wealth. Are you feeling bad? It's probably because somewhere down the line you made a mistake. And now everyone knows. Time to prove you can get back on track. Time to pour all your money and energy into getting better. Getting sick then isn't just a bodily experience. It comes with thousands of years of moral baggage. To get sick is to be impure. To get sick is to fail. It seems like our cultures are so centered on the individual that any system or belief we come up with tends to follow that line and ends up putting the individual at the center, even when we're influenced by other less individualistic cultures or by scientific literature that shows that we are not isolated islands. And Western medicine is just an example of this narrow-minded view. And I do mean narrow because here's where things get really ridiculous. According to Dr. Johnson, Western medicine only addresses 20% of what makes us healthy, and the other 80% are a mix of things like our environment, status, relationships, stress, work, things of that nature. And that's where the second powerful image of the book comes in, the garden, because like she said earlier, our bodies are ecosystems themselves, made up of our DNA and many other DNAs. And recent studies show that our bodies are actually in constant relationship with their surroundings and that our health depends on external factors. So our bodies are like gardens whose well-being depends mostly on things we cannot fix from the inside. To illustrate this, I wrote a love song called Every Landscape that portrays the person I love as yet another beautiful landscape on Earth. He's not a machine. His body is a biodiverse garden within an even bigger biodiverse garden, and so is yours. But before I play you the song, I want to read you another passage from the book The Body is a Doorway by Sophie Strand. I am not a noun on an empty page. I do nothing alone. I am a syntactical being strung together by my metabolism and needs and desires to thousands of other beings. Together, we are all a household, and every choice we make, whether mundane or explosive, takes place within the networked household of relationships. All right, now the song. Stay until the end of the episode to listen to the whole thing or just look it up on any music platform.
Deepest valley on your neck, I fall for a canyon so deep. The sweetest sunrise and sunset in your eyes and night of sleep. The longest, most winding roads are hidden below your skin. In your block, carrying ocean cold.
Now let's take a look at some of the factors that are in the 80%. We're going to play a little game of problems. I'm going to throw some collective societal issues that we don't typically associate with health, and you can tell us how they negatively impact our health, all right?
Okay, sounds good.
So the lack of community and, in general, mental health.
Sure. So there's interesting neurologists that have looked at people who there's scales of social isolation that sociologists and neurologists have been able to study. And people that rate higher on those scales, that feel more socially isolated, their brains actually look different. So as we get more socially isolated, as we get more disconnected from other human beings, we feel more fearful. We feel more paranoid. And it fuels this kind of spiral where then we socially isolate ourselves even more because we are fearful and paranoid. And I think you see this very much in the United States right now with our polarization and our disconnection from each other, some of it fueled by social media. And it's really breaking our communities down and making us suffer from, it's really kind of mental illnesses that social isolation creates, of feelings of fear and paranoia, and anxiety goes through the roof as well. And we're suffering from epidemics, I think, of all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next, the lack of good transportation infrastructure.
Right. Well, that one obviously has implications for all kinds of things. I work in rural northern New Mexico, where we do have a lot of poverty. A lot of people don't have functioning cars. We don't have a very good public transportation system. So the very most basic one is you can't access healthcare. And a lot of people, even in emergency situations. There was just a story on NPR recently about rural Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta area, and the high rates of infant and maternal mortality because women who are pregnant in that area don't have transportation, not enough healthcare close to them, and therefore they can't access prenatal care reliably, which is really related to healthier pregnancies. They can't get to the hospital in time if there's an emergency in their pregnancy, and that leads very directly to high infant mortality and maternal mortality and poor pregnancy outcomes and all kinds of, terrible health outcomes. But also transportation is important for things like getting work, getting access to healthy foods. So it's important for many aspects, including healthcare.
I was thinking of a very basic negative consequence, but you mentioned much deeper ones. I was just
What were
thinking
you
of
thinking of?
Too much car dependency, basically.
Well, definitely.
I know in the US it's more common.
Yeah, see, my U.S. brain goes to that that whole. But in a broader sense, there's a lot of good studies that show the closer you live to a highway, for example, the poorer your health is. Air pollution, much of it from cars, kills millions of people across the globe a year, and it's a really silent, unrecognized driver of poor health. Many of our cities have really poor air pollution and can cut as much off of your life as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day if you live in a city with poor air quality, which most cities do have poor air quality. So that's another big one. If you have a city where there's a lot of car dependency, that's going to be more likely to have poor air quality as well.
Yeah, that's crazy. And also people don't walk enough, which has a bunch of
totally.
other effects.
Yeah.
Okay, so now living in packed areas with no green spaces.
Yeah, that's another huge one. There's many, many studies. There's a great book called The Nature Fix, which goes into all of this about the ways that being connected to nature can make you healthier in so many ways. For one thing, walking in nature, digging in your garden, being in the woods, you actually recharge your microbiome. So even just a walk in the woods, there's both microbes that you can inhale through your breath and breathing. And so this idea of forest bathing that the Japanese have really developed really helps you because of physical activity, because of mindfulness, and it calms you and it lowers your cortisol level. But also, you physically breathe in microbes and you breathe in other um, substances that boost your immune system physically. So, in many, many ways, being close to nature, gardening, digging in the dirt also recharges your microbiome is really, really good for you. And it's lowers your blood pressure. And then the physical activity of being out in nature. And the other big impact of green spaces, especially in cities where there is not much tree canopy, where there are no green spaces, you can have neighborhoods in cities that are like that compared to other neighborhoods that do have more green spaces. And the difference during a heat wave can be as much as, 5 or 10 degrees Celsius. So, and even more than that Fahrenheit, obviously. So that can mean life and death for a lot of people, especially because those treeless places tend to be poorer areas. People are less likely to have air conditioning, more likely to live in cramped quarters that don't have good ventilation. And so really high risk of death, as we're seeing every summer now across the United States, Europe, India, China. Every summer we get these heat waves. And every summer we see people dying because of the heat waves.
So yeah, growing more plants seems like a good idea. And apparently, they even help when you're sick.
There was a study that showed that people recovered faster and felt better and were able to leave the hospital sooner if they had a window that was on a green space rather than a window to something like a brick wall or no window. So, and, if you live in a place in an urban area, having houseplants also can provide that.
That's really good to know. You mentioned that already a little bit, but air pollution, what's the negative health impacts of air pollution?
Well, when you're in a really polluted space, which now with the wildfires all over the world that affect us periodically, even if you don't live close to a place that's burning, the smoke goes for miles and miles. Most of us have experienced those days where it's really smoky in our places where we live, and you can feel it when you breathe it into your lungs. You can feel how it's affecting you. But the real danger is those days when we don't necessarily feel it. And if you're a healthy person, don't have asthma or, another lung disease, you might not actually perceive it. But day to day, living in most cities in the world, we're breathing in a lot of air pollution. And over time, it's having really huge effects on our health, including it can cause depression. It can be related to dementia. It can be related to heart disease. And so it's related to many, many illnesses where we're really not understanding how it's affecting us until it's too late. Millions of people a year globally die as a result of air pollution, but we never, as doctors, write that on a death certificate. We write that they died of heart disease or complications from dementia or complications from, maybe a lung disease, but we don't connect it to the air pollution. But so people don't realize how dangerous it really is.
Somewhat related, and it's a huge one, so you don't have to explain everything. The ecological crisis.
Okay. Well, I think, it is a huge one, and it is just kind of thinking about how to tackle it. One thing I mentioned before is just our global warming, increased extreme weather events, of course, causes a lot of death and destruction. Floods, extreme storms, tsunamis, things like that have caused a lot of death and destruction. Heat waves cause a lot of death every year. There's just a report released saying climate change is causing up to 30,000 deaths a year, but I think that's really an underestimate when we look at all the drivers. I think less attention is focused on biodiversity loss, okay? and how that might affect our health as humans. But we look at one way we can look at biodiversity loss and how it affects our health is pandemics that can happen. Because the closer we smush all of the remaining species together, the more humans encroach on these natural areas and destroy them, the more we get microbes that are jumping across species as well. So that's actually, there's theories about how COVID started, but definitely HIV started that way. And whether or not this most recent pandemic of COVID started that way, the fact that how COVID viruses are developing in other species and passing to humans is definitely a risk factor. And now we see things like Lyme disease, other tick-borne illnesses. We see a lot of tropical illnesses like Chagas disease, that dengue fever, that are moving further and further north and affecting more and more people as the climate gets warmer further north and they're able to expand their range. So a lot of the way that we're changing the biodiversity, the way that humans are encroaching on natural areas and destroying natural areas is putting us at risk, I think. And I think also when we think about that microbiome diversity that we need to survive, decreasing biodiversity in general, using more pesticides, using more chemicals in our environment affects also our microbiome. And so that biodiversity loss, we think about the extinction of polar bears, which is important, but it affects all kinds of organisms, even the single-celled organisms that we depend on in our microbiome. And just anxiety, a lot of places in Canada and the United States, especially in rural communities where we have now a wildfire season, and not even rural communities. I mean, look at LA, and major cities now are subject to this. And, as I write in the book about a community in New Mexico called it's Las Vegas, New Mexico, not the one in Nevada. And the area around Las Vegas that suffered a very huge fire in 2022. In the aftermath of that, I was doing some medical care in that area during that time in the aftermath. And of course, there's the physical problems, the people who have exacerbations of their chronic illnesses afterwards. But there's also the reverberation of, even if you weren't affected, even if your house wasn't affected, when your neighbors are affected, when your neighborhood is affected, you saw this in LA too, even if your house didn't burn down, if all the houses on the next block over burn down, that changes your whole neighborhood. And the next time the fires come, it makes everybody very anxious and suffer from what really is PTSD, because you're re-triggering this traumatic event every year when you have the same weather conditions that created the same devastation. So it affects livelihoods, it affects your ability to make a living.
Needless to say, that also applies to war. So maybe that's our cue to see our fossil fuel dependency as a weakness in terms of public health, given its influence on wars and the ecological crisis, which both lead to PTSD, among many other public health issues, by the way. Now, next factor, social inequality.
Yeah, this is like the biggest one, really. That I think is kind of driving everything else. We talk about the problems that people in poverty have with their health, but there have been interesting studies that show in places in the world where there's less social inequality, everybody is healthier. Because the fact is, you live in a very unequal society, crime rates go up. It becomes more stressful for everybody, certainly the people at the bottom of the ladder, because they're, struggling every day just to get their basic needs met. But even the people at the top of the ladder, because they have to have gated communities. They have to always be vigilant. They have to have security. They have to have all this stuff because they're protecting their vast wealth from, the have-nots. And that's stressful too. And so I wish I could spend a few minutes explaining that to the very, very wealthy folks in this world and saying, look, you're spending all this money protecting your vast wealth when if we lived in a more equitable society and, you wouldn't have to do that because you wouldn't be afraid. You would for example, just our public resources, like if everybody had access to high quality public education, for example, those rich people wouldn't have to spend so much money sending their kids to the elite private schools. If everybody had access to good health care, all of it, then you wouldn't have to worry about spending exorbitant money to create systems just for the wealthy people if everybody had access to it. And the stress of living in an unequal society affects all of us. And it's something also that we don't recognize how much it affects our health.
Another one that may be a bit complex, but I'm sure you can explain shortly, the historical dominance of white people over black people.
There's lots of ways that our health system has been created on myths about people of color and specifically black people largely, but other people of color too. And, those myths have funny ways of propagating themselves through the years. There's, you would think that now they wouldn't exist, but there's many, many ways that they do. We think about fields like dermatology, right? When I was in medical school, all the dermatology textbooks that I saw showed rashes and skin conditions on white skin. So the same condition can look really different on black skin and then make it very much harder to diagnose, which can be life-threatening when you're talking about a skin cancer, right? We learned things about the drugs that don't work in black people, but work in white people. And those, now I went to medical school a super long time ago, 30 years ago now. So I think some of those things have been debunked in the last 30 years, but doctors who are like me in their 50s or 60s, if you learn that thing in medical school, it sticks in your brain and it's hard to, remove really. So what does that cause? That causes your black patients to have less access to all these medications and therefore more untreated high blood pressure in black populations, which has been shown to be the case. So that's what happens. And it's not something that I think is consciously, anti-black, but it's just the subtle effects of how we are trained and how that carries on. Those stereotypes have power in our brains and result in the end in these health disparities that we see, things like blacks not getting treated for having more uncontrolled blood pressure because we're not using all the tools that we have at our disposal. So in 2016, there was a study of two cases given to medical students. And one case was of a white patient and one case was a black patient. But the rest of the story was the same. They were patients in pain and they needed pain medication. And when they did this study with a lot of medical students, they found that the white patient was more likely to get higher doses of pain medication and the black patient was less likely. And when they asked the students why, they found that students had a lot of ideas about white and black people. It was based on an erroneous idea of the differences in biology, which there are no differences really in biology between white and black folks. And they had some ideas which are wrong, that black people's skin is thicker or that black people felt pain less acutely. And so those led to different clinical decisions, which were based in falsehoods, really. Based in stereotypical ideas that we get from all kinds of places, but also from our medical education. And we really need to be taught quite explicitly that race is not biological.
What about the historical dominance of men over women? Before we get to that, let me give some important information about the show for new listeners, but if you've heard it before, just skip about a minute. Do you ever feel like every important conversation turns into just another petty debate and that we deserve better? Well, welcome to Make Sense, the show where I, singer-songwriter Leïla Six, interview people with super relevant and important insight to put our ideologies aside and make the most efficient decisions to build societies that actually make sense based on our shared values. I believe these are freedom and safety, which for humans comes from community. And by the way, whether you look at it scientifically or spiritually, community includes the entire planet. But these values can sometimes be a bit conflicting, which is tricky. So how can we shape a world that's both safe and exciting for everyone and on the largest scale possible? Well, that's a tough question and an ambitious goal, and it would be easy to get cynical about it and just say, well, the world's unfair, so I'll fight for my share and F the rest. But I don't want to do that, and I'm sure you don't either. So we need to understand topics that are fundamental to how the world works, complex topics that require our attention if we want to stay true to our values. Now, I tell all of my guests that I only want to have constructive, snark-free conversations here because I want everyone to feel welcome to learn, feel, and grow. So I'll ask the same of you in the comment section. Now, all that's been said, let's use our senses to make sense of the world and create more sensible societies. I know, it's too much wordplay, but I had to.
Until maybe the last 20 years or so, maybe even less, almost all clinical trials were done only on men, only on white men, and only on usually younger white men or middle-aged white men. So most clinical trials really weren't tested in older people, weren't tested in women, weren't tested in people who were outside of, Europe and the United States. And were mostly on men of a certain, what weren't tested on people with disabilities, weren't tested on people who were either obese or very thin. It was just the standard, what they decided was the standard person. And they did that to control the outcomes. And people talk so much about the holy grail of randomized controlled trials. But the fact is that randomized controlled trials until very recently were done on such a narrow slice of the population that, some of these drugs, some of these technologies that have been developed, we don't really know how they're going to be in other kinds of populations because they really haven't been tested in other kinds of populations. And they make kind of the rest of us into guinea pigs in a way.
Yeah, and also I know about symptoms like that are different in women, that tend to be different in women and men. I know about autism and some levels of autism and strokes. I think it is.
Well, heart attacks.
Heart attacks. Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one. Is heart attacks. So, and heart disease in general. So women end up. Women are less likely to have heart attacks and heart disease, but also more likely to die of a heart attack because often they're not recognized as a heart attack until it's too late, or the heart disease that they're having isn't recognized and treated until it's too late. And the other factor in all of this is that the amount of research going into conditions, things like endometriosis or conditions that affect only women. I mean, menopause itself, the amount of research going into some of these factors that affect only women is much less than diseases that affect men.
That's crazy. That's really outrageous.
Yeah.
I remember learning about the symptoms in women for heart attacks in a TV show.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, how come? And I was like almost 30, I think. It's crazy that it's not more well known. And apparently not even by doctors because they let these women go back home and just wait it out.
Right.
That's
true.
Crazy.
Yeah.
There's another external factor I want to add, and that's agriculture. The way modern Western societies do agriculture is detrimental to, first of all, farmers' health because they're exposed to a bunch of chemicals and have the highest rates of certain specific cancers because of these chemicals. But it's also detrimental to anyone who eats food. So you, me, and everyone we know, because these chemicals and other practices make the soil less rich in nutrients, which makes our food less rich in nutrients. So that's bad for us. They also contaminate our water and our air, the two things our bodies cannot go without. So go check out my episode about agriculture if you want to know more about all of this and what you can do about it. It's crazy to see that so many public health issues, from diabetes and cancer to PTSD and suicide, are directly linked to things that don't even start in the body, but in society, in the way we decide to shape our communities and politics. And we're going to talk about that. But first, I cannot do an episode about health without ranting about doctors. A lot of times, doctors dismiss my and just our concerns in general and won't even take like more than 5 minutes to listen to a patient. Now, I guess it's because of the business model of being a doctor and it's not like the doctor's fault per se, but I personally almost always feel upset after leaving the doctor's office. And a lot of times I get either nothing out of it or pills that in no way, shape or form address the root causes of my symptoms. And I feel like I did my best to care for my health because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I don't know what else to do, but to trust the doctor. And ultimately, the doctor didn't give me the help that I really feel I needed. And I've only been to the doctor in countries with universal healthcare, so I can't even imagine the stress I would feel on top of that if getting sick could potentially bankrupt me.
Yeah.
And a very perverse consequence of this, what I perceive as a lack of dedication from these doctors, is that it leads a lot of people to resort to all kinds of therapies, diets, and supplements, mostly which they find online, and which might totally work and be legitimate, but have also turned into this huge, sometimes baseless industry and belief system that can become detrimental when it leads to wellness fatigue, or worse, when it delays important diagnoses. Come back for the rest of my rant in part 2 and to see what Dr. Wendy Johnson thinks can be done to make things better, and for a few movie recommendations. Here's a snippet.
Healing is so built on relationship, right? This is why placebos work, or different kind of rituals or ceremonies often work in certain cultures. And that's why this wellness industry has turned into a multi-trillion-dollar industry across the globe, is because people are not getting that from their doctors.
In the meantime, you can get some extra information and listen to the song you heard today at the end of this episode or on any music platform. And don't forget to check out Dr. Wendy Johnson's very important book, Kinship Medicine. I hope you got some valuable insights from this episode, and if you want to learn more from my guests, you'll find everything you need in the show notes. I, for one, thank you for your attention. I know you could have been watching or listening to a billion other things, and I'm glad you picked this one. Now, 3 things before I leave you. Number 1, if you liked the music you heard today, you should look me up on the music platform you use. There will also be a link in the show notes to help you find me on there. Number 2, if you want to help me make the internet a place for more constructive and nuanced conversations, you can subscribe, like the episode, share it, and leave a comment or review depending on where you're listening to this. And number 3, you can also subscribe to my free Patreon, to my free newsletter Night Sky, and follow me on Instagram or TikTok to understand a bit better the messages behind my songs. Again, everything will be in the show notes. All right, thank you, and take care, and keep trying to make sense.